Hey, everyone. I'm your host, James Jackson, and this is ARCast. Join me each episode as we shine the spotlight on a category management or shopper insights professional doing compelling work in the trenches. If you're ready, this is going to be a doozy. Let's dive right in. I'm here today with Caleb Silver. He's editor-in-chief at Investopedia and also senior vice president of content, and he's a new friend of ARC. So, Caleb, welcome to the show.
Thank you, my friend. Good to be with you.
Yeah. And for those who did not go to our annual conference in February down in San Antonio, Caleb was one of our keynote speakers. He gave an excellent presentation on what's happening in the market. And given everything that's going on, we thought we would invite him onto the podcast and ask a couple of questions that you might have interest in. So, Caleb, before we begin, I always kind of throw a little zinger out there and get your response. So I've watched your TikToks. If anybody's watched his TikToks, he has a skateboard that he rides through Manhattan. And when we talk, you always have the skateboard kind of pitched or leaned on the wall. What is it about the skateboard? Why are you riding a skateboard?
That's just how I roll. I've been skating since I was a little boy. Originally around the streets of Manhattan, and then moved out to New Mexico and skateboarded, and was one of the early snowboarders doing that in the early 1980s. Okay. So I just like to go sideways, James, but I also I know the city pretty well, and I like to roll around it, and I got to get from place to place really quickly sometimes. Yeah. I have a very unusual schedule where I do a lot of media appearances, so that could mean coming in the office in the morning, then going over to one of the networks to do a hit on television, then maybe to the stock exchange, and then maybe to a client meeting and back to the office. And it's just more efficient for me. Plus, I like the feeling. And I just gotten used to it. It's just this, piece of wood that I carry around New York City, or I ride around New York City, or I have on the train. That's just now become part of my personality, so to speak.
Sweet. I just had to ask. Like I said, I've seen it a bunch of times. So
it's a longboard. It's not a skateboard.
It's a long. I'm sorry. Yes, it's a longboard, and it is long. So I just wanted to touch on that. We're going to jump in. For those who are listening, this is a little different episode, but we hope to bring you some information that's truly relevant. So if you're ready, Caleb, let's get in the trenches.
Let's go.
Let's get in the trenches. All right. So first and foremost, though, many people may not know who you are or maybe your history, your career. So if you could spend 2 or 3 minutes just sharing where you come from, what you've done, and what you're doing now.
Yeah, happy to. I am the editor-in-chief of Investopedia, investopedia.com. We are a 25-plus-year-old website that is all about investing, finance, and money education, like teaching people what things mean, how they apply to their lives. We've been around since 1999, founded in Alberta, Canada, of all places, back during the internet bubble, but are now part of the Dotdash Meredith family of publishers, which includes People and Real Simple and Food and Wine, Better Homes and Gardens. So we're a part of that family, and we are the finance brand of that family. And I'm a business journalist. I've been doing business journalism for about 30 years now. Started my career at Bloomberg TV in the early days of Bloomberg Television, and then moved over to CNN and CNN Money, and ran the business desk at CNN for a while. Also worked on some shows like The Situation Room at CNN, and produced for various other programs there. And I'm a documentary maker. I'm an art major. I'm an accidental financial commentator, because I'm actually an art and art history major. I went to college and studied art and art history, was really into film and documentaries. I actually started a production company in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I grew up at a pretty young age. In my 20s, did a bunch of nature documentaries. Those took me to South America, Central and South America. Ended up meeting my wife down in South America. Came to New York, went to grad school for journalism, and then went right into business news, because that was really the frothy part of the internet bubble. And I got to cover that, to cover that explosion. Then stayed with it and was there through the financial crisis with CNN, and then ultimately came to Investopedia, which I thought would be a 6-month stint about 9.5 years ago, but I'm still here. And I'd always used Investopedia. It's a, I've always thought it was a super valuable resource, and I had so much respect for it. So when I saw that it was brought into the IAC family, which is what Dotdash Meredith is a part of, IAC is a publicly traded company. I was fascinated by that. Ended up coming in thinking I would, again, do like a 6-month consulting stint with their content. And here I am 9.5 years later, the face of the brand, sort of the explainer in chief, but I am not the only editor here. We have a very talented team of editors and writers and people on the product side and on the sales side that make this engine run. And to be a website that is 25 plus years old, to be any brand with 25 plus years, and especially the internet, that's like 250 real years. So we feel like we're survivors and we're still providing a valuable service. And it is like the honor of my career to be able to represent Investopedia and to be sort of the face of this brand, even though there are many faces and smart people behind it.
Nice. Well, thank you for that. And there's a couple times every year for sure that I'm like, I don't understand what they're talking about on TV, and I'll go to Investopedia. I've been doing it for years. So it's actually cool to talk to the face. So let's get started. Obviously there's a lot going on in the marketplace. We're seeing it on the news and what have you. But for you, Caleb, when we talk about the economy, what are some key indicators that you're watching right now? And is there, given what we're seeing, some type of inflection point or some key moment or metric that you're looking for and kind of analyzing really closely?
Yeah, great question. I like to look at the broad economic indicators, but what I really like to look at and what would really have a valuable lens on at Investopedia is sentiment. What are people feeling and how do they express those feelings? So I'm always looking at the difference between how we feel and how we act, what we do based on those feelings. And sometimes there's a pretty wide gap. We're in a really interesting moment right now where consumer sentiment is at a multi-year low. Consumer expectations for inflation haven't been this high, James, since 1981. So we're going back a minute. And at the same time, retail sales have kind of held up and the personal savings rate is increasing, but we can tell that there's been a big drop off in discretionary spending or planning for discretionary spending. So I'm looking at spending because consumer spending is 70% of GDP, but I'm also looking at where that spending is waxing and waning. And obviously now it's more on the wants, where people are spending more on the needs because prices have been going up and they expect prices to go up through these tariffs. But also, what are they sacrificing? What are the sacrifices they're making? Then I like to look at things like delinquency rates, right? Credit card delinquency rates, auto loan delinquency rates, mortgage delinquency rates. When they start piping up a little bit, I start paying attention to those just because, those are things that we usually make payments on. And when people are getting 90 days plus on that, it's a sign that it's a canary in the coal mine, so to speak. And then just basically revolving consumer credit. So mortgages, credit cards, home loans, et cetera. I like to look at that gap. Internally, though, I like to look at corporate fundamentals. What are companies telling us? What are they showing us? What are gross profit margins doing across certain sectors? You can look from every sector, from the retail sector to the high-tech sector. In the retail sector, I like to look at ticket order size, even in the restaurant group. How much are people spending when they go into your establishment, and how is that ticket size, check size waxed and waned? And then I like to look at listen to the words that CEOs and CFOs use in their earnings reports, because you can gain a lot from those. You're looking for those trap words that tell you, whoa, this could get a lot worse than expected, or, oh, that's actually not as bad as I thought it would be. So tuned into all those things, but from a high level, the big ones, and then internally, what the numbers tell us. But I'd like to also see where the gap is. What do you feel, and what are you actually doing about it?
So what are you seeing right now? Because if you look or listen, you talk about the CEOs, some CEOs are saying we're already in a recession. Some CEOs are saying, hey, we're waiting and watching and we're not making decisions. There's a lot. It sounds really negative, but is that really true that, the gap is maybe closing between the sentiment and the behavior?
starting to see cracks of that, especially in this season's earnings report so far. We had Delta Airlines, one of the biggest carriers, I think it's the biggest carrier, report results a couple of weeks ago, and their CEO wouldn't even give forward-looking guidance.
Wow.
The CEO doesn't want to give guidance on what the next quarter might look like, especially on an airline. That's a pretty long-tail business. Most people make their plans in advance, especially for the kind of travelers they're looking for on the international side and where they make their money, business travel and on the international side. That tells you something, right? Mm-hmm. When you hear, the CEO of Walmart talking about, how they're benefiting from a wealthier consumer doing more of their shopping for more of the needs at a Walmart, that tells you something. And, when you're looking at, same store sales declines across like the dollar stores and the Dollar Generals of the world, that tells you something, right? Where are people making the cuts? Who's making the cuts? And so, we're getting stretched. We already had a K-shaped economy. It's just gotten worse, but we've also had this big hit in volatility to the stock market, which has the knock-on wealth effect. And we know half the country's invested in the stock market, but the top 10% own the most. Everybody knows that. But everybody's impacted by the wealth effect, the psychological impact of higher stock prices or lower stock prices, bear markets, corrections, fears of, a stock market crash. All those things do weigh on us psychologically and tend to make us spend less and consider spending and investing decisions a lot more than we do when things are better.
So at conference, you talked a lot about kind of the bifurcation of shoppers, your low end and your high end. But I'm wondering, and so that was a trend that was happening before all of this happened, in the past 2 months. Would you say that you're seeing potentially an acceleration of that gap, being widened, or what's actually happening, do you think, in that trend, or maybe some other trends based on what we've seen over, call it, the past 3 or 4 weeks?
Yeah, well, we haven't seen, just because of the inflation reports and the retail sales reports are rear view mirror indicators. We're looking back at the month of March in a lot of cases. And in March, we didn't have the tariffs in place yet. We had the threat of them. We knew they were coming in some form or fashion. There was a lot of, I would say, maybe doom spending going on here, where people were maybe stocking up a little bit or making the purchase before that item might have been hit with a tariff. You saw that in the automobile sector. You see it right now in the automobile sector. They're having super crisp sales because people aren't sure how much a car is going to cost in a month, and I totally get it. So you saw a lot of that purchasing brought forward, so to speak, kind of like what we see during pre-holiday season, right? We saw so much of the Christmas holiday shopping season pulled forward into late October and November. You're kind of seeing a lot of that now because people don't know. So all of that looks okay. And in fact, we came into 2025 with the economy with kind of the wind in its sails. Inflation was chilling, was cooling a little bit, right? We had 4% unemployment, which is almost maximum employment in this country. It's between 3.5% and 4%. And we had wages that were outpacing inflation. That's a pretty good place to be. And corporate profits were doing nicely, and the stock market was at an all-time high. Now, new administration, new policy, radically different policy, a reshaping of the American economy and the global economy in the process. That is going to send some shockwaves. But I think we've felt that first tremor, but we have not felt the actual shockwave, and I think that's coming our way this spring.
Oh, wow. Okay. So let's jump in a little bit more about the tariffs. So, what are your primary concerns when it comes to the tariffs, and are there any industries, sectors, that you're looking at and seeing that they might really be affected by those tariffs?
Yeah, well, you got to look at anybody that does a lot of imports from China, and that's a lot of businesses. We do $520 billion worth of trade between the two countries. We're our best customers for each other in large part. So there's a lot of industries that are affected by that. And it's some industries, small businesses perhaps, that get finished product from China, and it's the others that get components that are critical to their manufacturing process and critical to their margins. So what happens with tariffs is, you just pay higher prices. Producers pay higher prices on the imports. They pass those on to consumers. And for the businesses, that kind of messes with their profit margins, right? And it makes their profits weaker going forward. And as investors, we are paying for future profit growth. That is the game. That is the understanding, right? The stock market is a discounting mechanism for future profit growth So we're paying for that. And if we don't see that and we don't see it growing like we're used to, we're going to look other places for that type of return. And that's why you're seeing investors selling out of a lot of stocks, especially the ones that were growing so fast. So there's that. There's also, the cure for high inflation, James, is high inflation, because eventually we reach a breaking point where consumers stop spending, businesses cut back on their spending, and then we get deflation. And I know that sounds good. That's not good.
It's not.
You don't want deflation. No. You want a little bit of inflation, right? Just a little bit. Why? Because you need pricing power as a business, and everybody knows that. And it's just the way it's baked in. Natural inflation is like 2.7%. So you need a little bit so companies can grow their profit margins, expand, hire more people, pay competitive wages, et cetera. So I'm looking at what this does to profit margins. And I'm also looking at, well, what if the experiment that this administration is trying to manifest actually could work? What would it look like? Well, it looks like more onshoring, obviously, right? More made in America products, but trying to reignite the manufacturing industry and bring more workers into it. And it has slimmed down from like 20 million 10 years ago to like 12 or 13 million today.
Right.
So bringing them in and paying them competitive wages, imagine that. That would actually be really cool. But if you pay them competitive wages, there go your profit margins, right? And in the meantime, so many businesses have been leaning so hard into AI and robotics to need less people, because you know what? Robots don't need to take the weekend off, and they don't have shift breaks, right? They work all night, all day, 24/7. And, that's kind of the way it works. And that's where the productivity is. And that's where the profit margins are. So in a shareholder-based economy like the one we have in this American capitalism of ours, and that's what we have, make no mistake about it, how is this going to work? To pay competitive wages and also be able to increase profit margins at the same time through technology, yet bring more manufacturing back to the United States and grow your profits and therefore your stock price over time. That's a pretty radical experiment. And I don't know how that's going to work. And I'm curious, but though I'm looking for signs within all of that dynamic that tell us that things are working or they're not working, or what part of it isn't working.
Have you seen the signs yet, or is this back to what we talked about before? Are you seeing anything that would tell us either we're headed in the right direction with this, or a little tweak here, a little tweak there, and we're on the road?
No, all you're seeing is promises from American companies to make more in America, build this or that plant, hire X amount of workers. And these are pledges and promises. What we know in these industries, call it semiconductors, call it auto manufacturing, call it, widget, manufacturing, whatever it is. You don't snap your fingers and start a factory and start that supply chain right away. These are multi-year processes that require capital. But guess what happens if we go into an economic downturn? R&D capital, right? Expansion capital, that kind of disappears because you're just losing sales because sales are slugging. So this is a really difficult needle to thread, and I'm fascinated. And I'm also watching and listening to what our administration is saying.
Yeah.
And when you hear the Treasury Secretary saying, these price increases due to tariffs are a one-time price adjustment. Well, are they? Is that the way it's actually going to work? Or is there now pricing elasticity because, they could do it a little bit and now they have to pay a little bit more. And maybe they get, elasticity works until something snaps like a rubber band. So there's that. And then when you hear the Fed officials start to use the word transient again, James, my ears perk up like a Cocker Spaniel. I'm like, what? Don't use the transient word with inflation. That's a bad word. We know that didn't work out well the last time. So that's kind of what I'm tuned into.
So help, just so I'm clear, when you mean transient, what are you saying?
Well, when we had inflation, that inflation bout in 2021, 2022, coming out of the pandemic, we had all that stimulus money and interest rates were super low. Prices shot up, right? Inflation was at 8.8%. And the Federal Reserve said, no, this is transient. This shall pass. This shall pass soon. Yeah. Transient, like I'm only on this little train for a little while and then I'm getting off. And it wasn't, right? It was about a year and a half of pretty brutal inflation that threw us into a bear market and broke a lot of household budgets and required the Fed, to hike up interest rates to bring it down. And we're kind of still there, stuck in this weird place right now as we have this big transformation in economic policy. So are you not entertained? There's so much going on. But that's what I mean by that. When you hear words like that, or one-time price increases, one-time price adjustments, you gotta listen really closely, and you gotta watch the details, because often they're not what they say.
But didn't the Fed chief yesterday talk about, I don't think he said it specifically, but he hinted at stagflation?
Yeah, and I would probably say we're already there. And for those of you that don't know what that is, it is not a bad Tom Hanks movie. It is when you have slowing or stagnant growth, rising prices, inflation, now more inflation coming due to tariffs, and rising unemployment. And that was the 1970s in the United States of America, and it was not a good time to run a business, and it was not a good time for the stock market. So we don't want stagflation. And the next step down into the circle of doom is a recession. That comes right after stagflation. That's why he's worried about that. That's why a lot of business leaders are talking about stagflation, potential recession.
Yeah, somebody gave an analogy where in a stagflationary times, it's like a goalie in soccer trying to defend a free kick. And because you can't usually you can pull one lever and do one or the other, but when you have both going on, you're almost guessing. And so it was interesting that they use that analogy.
Yeah, and to take it a little further, that the Fed has two tools that it uses to control monetary policy, right? It's interest rates, right? And it's buying back securities. And it's two jobs. Its dual mandate is keeping us at full employment, which I said 3.5% to 4% unemployment, but also keeping prices stable, price stabilization. That means keeping inflation between 2% and 2.5%. It's had a really hard time doing that over the past several years, and now this new force through tariffs is going to make it even harder. So if prices spike because of inflation, the Fed's only answer is to raise interest rates. Is to raise interest rates to bring them down, but we know the president doesn't want them to do that. You lower interest rates, you're going to stimulate borrowing, but you're going to stimulate more inflation. So the Fed's in a tricky spot right now.
Sure. So you mentioned Dotdash Meredith, and some of your publications, including Investopedia, but the Real Simple, Better Homes. So you're seeing, behavior or queries or questions of shoppers. So I'm going to ask this question and see what you think. So when we have persistent inflation, so it was starting to subside, but now it sounds like it's going to ratchet back up. What happens if we continually have inflation? What does it do to the buyer psyche? Yeah. And what adjustments do we make because of that?
Great question. This was already happening, well into a good part of last year, and it ebbs and flows, but you see a lot more how to do ... on a budget, or best budget ... So replace ... with crockpot meals, or, do a family road trip, or build your own patio, or redo your kitchen on a budget, right? Discount this, budget that, cheaper ways to do X or Y, the best return on your money for this or that. So you see a lot of that going on. On the Investopedia side, where I find it totally fascinating, is questions both about how do I protect my investments in my portfolio in an economic downturn or in a recession, or what happens to my 401k if we go into but you also get the household stuff of, can I tap my 401k for a hardship loan? When can I tap my 401k? Best personal loans at X rate, or safest place to put my money, best money market accounts, best CDs, stock markets in turmoil. People are looking for safe havens. So you get some of that. And then you get people that are who are a little bit more promiscuous, looking for ways to take advantage of volatility and downturns in their stock accounts and their brokerage accounts. So you get the full range of things, because people come in all kinds of doors at Investopedia. A lot of people come to us through search. So you see it all. But across the entire portfolio, it's what I'm talking about. It is, make my dollar go further, or help me save money on the things that I want to do or that I need to do. And you see that from parenting and health through, how do I, redo my bathroom or my kitchen, on a budget.
So let me take it one step further. So in our industry, we've been seeing a lot more sales within the private label part of the business. So with that kind of mentality and the value seeking and what have you, what are you seeing around brand loyalty? So the national brands or regional brands, and potentially shifts into private label and the growth of private label.
Yeah. Well, I talked about this back at your conference too, because it's no secret that retailers are pushing their private labels, and some of them have gotten so good at it that the private label has become its own thing. Like Pippin, for example, that's done pretty well. I don't think people think twice about it. I don't think they think it's a Costco brand. Am I right on Costco? I think so. I just think people think of it as Kirkland, the other thing. So they've done a great job of doing that. And now they're pretty much across most categories. I haven't seen the beer yet, but it's probably coming. So I think value rules. There is brand loyalty for some products in some categories, and a lot of your members in the CMA are benefit from that. Brand loyalty is a thing. People, these brands have become verbs, and they've become essentials in people's lives across the range of categories. But if people are making budget decisions these days, sometimes the dollar rules, right? And the better price rules, and then the better value rules. And it's not necessarily the quality of the product, but if I can get two for the price of one, you better believe I'm going to do it because I know I'm going to need it. So there are some categories that are much more vulnerable to that as well. But private labels are only going to become a bigger part of the ecosystem because why? It's better profit margins for the retailer, right? They might as well own the ecosystem, and you can apply that rule just about anywhere. Just look at Google. Just the way that it works. It's an advertising delivery mechanism through YouTube and through Google.com, but it also now controls a lot of the results through Gemini and through its own interface, where it takes a long time to get to the results. So if you're in one of those big retailers, you're battling, your other traditional competitors and the private label over price, over a picky consumer. It's probably never been a more challenging time to do that. So how do you solve for that when you're going to be challenged on price, and that everyone is coming for your customer? It's super hard right now.
All right. So, we're talking to category managers, shopper insights people, and you talked about pricing. They also handle assortment, promotion, things like that. So if you were to recommend to a category manager things that they need to think about when they're making these strategic decisions, and even down to the tactical level, what are some things that you might recommend or potentially say, hey, you need to look out for X?
I think consumers have become so much smarter, right? Shoppers are smart. They have so many tools these days to help them make shopping decisions. And whether that's, word of mouth or TikTok or Reddit or Yelp or Facebook or friends and family, there's so many different things that they can look at to get their ideas and inspiration. So you got to kind of be where they are. I know we say that all the time, but what does that really mean? I think about this all the time for Investopedia. Like everybody knows us. We're a good brand name. We've been a resource forever. We're free, but we're battling competition and AI and everybody else. So you got to be where they are. And sometimes we don't, you think you know where they are, but you don't. A lot of businesses don't take the time to actually do that research. They look at the ROI or ROAI on their ad spend to make sure that they're, how many impressions did we get? But more and more, it is the conversation that you have to be a part of as a retailer. And that is happening on the social media platforms. It's happening on the Reddits of the world. And even if you're not in the conversation, P.S., you should be. You have to listen to the way people are talking about your brand and the way they're making decisions. And not everybody's on it, but it is like a publicly open forum where it's just free research if you had somebody to take the time. And you can use AI tools to kind of scrape that as well and get what is the essence of what people are looking for in our category and what's working. So I think there's a lot more intelligence that you can grab from just listening well and even contributing to the conversation. I've seen some incredible activations across Reddit and some other spaces where it's like, wow, that's a respectful way to play as a brand that respects its customers. And guess what? That type of respect equals loyalty, right? Reciprocity, thanking customers, right? And it's not all incentives, but how can you make your customers feel even more special beyond those annoying surveys everybody asks us to be up for every single thing we do? I mean, come on. How did you do on letting me book my ticket on your airline's app? Great. That's what it's for. That's what the money's for. You really need a survey? Do we really need to talk about this? Right? That's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
What makes you feel good about using our product? What would make you want to use it more? Like, would you be interested in, can we thank you for your loyalty. We want to double down on your order on us, or whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's meeting them where they are and having that conversation that shows that you respect their intelligence and you know what they're going through in terms of their budget. So there's that. There's, things like that you can activate around. And then the super creative marketing that is inspirational because of the moment. And marketers are getting better at that, whether it was, I think back to the, the blackout at the Super Bowl and the Oreo cookie activation.
Yeah.
That was a really smart one. Or, there's like, can you be in the moment to capture that fleeting magic lightning of social media magic and make something out of your brand and then rock it like you talk about me skateboarding. What about that dude with the cranberry juice years ago who was skating around listening to music with his big thing drinking that was awesome. For cranberry juice cocktail and that brand. It's like, wow, it's out there. You just have to look a little bit harder.
Sure. All right, last question for you, and then we'll take a quick break. And you mentioned promotions. A lot of our folks right now are planning for holidays, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and it's really hard to see where things are going to be. What are you seeing out there for people who are in that kind of space, and or what recommendations would you make to them so that they can actually execute some sort of plan and have something on the shelves for those holidays?
Yeah. And I know why. We all know why. They know where their sales come from and when they get them. But you know what's I'm going to give you some silver linings in all this.
Sure.
In the anxiety about the economy and kind of where we've come from and where we've been. Think about where we've come from over the last 5 years through the pandemic, where we didn't know if anything was going to go back to normal, to all of a sudden this excess of everything. But there's a change in mentality that happened, I think, among a lot of us. I speak for myself, but I also speak, I think, for general population, which is the value of experience, right? We realize how valuable experiences were, right? And that's not to say that things and products are not, but they are tied together.
Sure.
Right? So moments like Halloween, the holidays, the Super Bowl, the Oscars, these big ticket, mass eyeball, mass media events that we gather and spend around July 4th, the Memorial and the Labor Days of it all. Those are, big spending holidays, and they're big togetherness holidays, but they're big experience holidays, right? And I think the American consumer and the American investor, for that matter, has become much more tuned into, I want memories. I want things that are very hard to attain, the things that are priceless, but I want them at the right price, where I want to make the most of the experience. And I think the more brands tune into that versus the usual, get your, Beetlejuice costume now at, Ford, blah, 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 whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I think the more it's about create the moment, and the moment and the brand and the product can sing together in a way that's, again, appeals to us emotionally, because that's why that drives a lot of our shopping, but also, gives us that perception that there is value in creating that experience as well that you can achieve through the product or brand.
Sure.
And the more that brands do that, I think the better off that they are. And some of them are much better at it than others. But I think that you can get better at that. You can always get better at that as a brand. And I think you have to, be tuned into where people are having those conversations. Yeah. There are ways that brands have had so much more success in an accidental social media post that they didn't think was going to work versus a $5 million television ad campaign that they focus group to death, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, that's all we had to do is find the guy who was on the longboard with the cranberry juice cocktail and pay him to be a spokesperson. That was easy.
Right.
So you know what I mean. But that's kind of what I think is the path forward.
Yeah, no, I agree. Experiences do matter. And like you said, coming out of COVID, I think we were hungry for them, and that hasn't changed. So we've been in
I
the
think
trenches.
brands matter too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think,
Oh,
I
they
think
do.
brands
Absolutely.
matter too.
Yes.
Right. And I think there's an emotional attachment to that. And I think there's
Yes.
brand loyalty. And in a world, just to close on this, in a world where we are becoming more digitized and there's more artificial intelligence and there's more deepfake and there's more, was that real? I don't know. And can't even tell anymore. Brand authenticity, I think, is becoming more and more important. At least I hope it is. That's the bet I am making. So, I would treat your brand with the respect and importance that it deserves, because it is everything right now.
Good words to go by. Thanks for that, Caleb. And we've been in the trenches a while here, so I just want to come up for air for one last question. Finally, coming up for air. So I asked you at the beginning a little bit about your career, but could you share a little bit about you personally? You mentioned your wife, you mentioned New Mexico, but could you talk a little bit more about you?
My favorite subject. No, I am a dad. I have two lovely daughters, 20 and 18, college students.
Nice.
I've been married for 25 plus years. Met my wife in Uruguay. Her father was a foreign exchange student in my father's house in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1961. And I met her when I was on a vision quest through South America and fell in love.
Wow.
And we've been married ever since. So I feel pretty lucky. I feel like one of those people that I feel very fortunate, very lucky, but I also am just highly motivated and so kind of into what I'm doing and what I get to do, that I think it creates a lot of good surreptitious events in my life. And that's how I met you, right? That's how I got introduced to your group, and because I'm out there and I'm into it, and I love mixing it up. I'm like I said, an art major, but I grew up in the restaurant business in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I'm a cook at heart. I'm a server. If I wasn't doing this, I'd probably be back in the restaurant business. I will eventually probably wind up in that business, which is such a difficult business, just because I feel like hospitality and food are part of my love language. So I like to do that, but I like to feel like I'm a little bit of a 21st century middle-aged plus Renaissance man. I really enjoy the arts. I really enjoy sports. I really enjoy culture. I have a production company. I make short films and documentaries still. I love great food and great wine, and I'm just kind of like here for it. And I would say that's, of the things that I'm really proud about, it's the fact that, of all the decisions that I've made, they brought me to this really wonderful place where I can be the spokesperson for Investopedia, but also get to meet cool people like you, and just have a never stop learning type of life. And that's kind of what I'm proud of.
Awesome. Well, Caleb, I got to say thank you, because you've been super, super generous and kind with your time. I know you are getting called to and fro, especially in this time period, but you carved out time for us. So we appreciate that. And then just everything that you shared. A lot of people have questions. We're probably going to be having you come back and do a lot more with CMA. This is kind of step one. So again, thanks for joining us here on ARCast.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, you just listened to another amazing episode of ARCast. Please look forward to more interesting people just like Caleb in the weeks to come. And also, please don't forget to share ARCast with your colleagues. If you have feedback, topic suggestions, or you want to show up on the show, please go to www.catman.global/ARCast. All I need for you to do is go down to the bottom. There's a submission form there. It comes directly to me, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Today's episode was produced by Zach Peterson and edited by Jake Nemi, and was recorded at Studio Xerxes in Minnesota. Our theme music is brought to you by Bryant Lowry. And a special thanks to my friends at the Association of Retail and Consumer Professionals for their promotion and management. Well, that's it for today. I'm signing off. Thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you on our next episode. Bye.